Chapter 130. Farewell. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Bai did not consult the regarding the abdication of the throne, but no one made any noise at all. After all, none of them were particularly fond of the backwater that is the steppe. The walkers used the convenient excuse of it being supposedly protected by the war god. Taking up his name like that, stealing his sword and his woman is bad enough. Now you want to own even his land? If their war god does exist, just on that account, he would have come mano a mano with you. Of course, because of his nature. The Lich played the part of a contrarian. Not that I doubt your decision, but I can't just sit and watch you waste a perfect chance to build an army out of them. Your own undead army. The weaker ones can be transformed into spato, while the stronger ones can be turned into revenants. Then you'll have an army of 10 millions undead, large enough to scour the entire land of Istha. The best part is you don't even have to worry about disloyalty and insufficient battle fodders. The fuck is wrong with this psycho? Bai heaved a sigh of consternation. If I do as he said, I don't think my executioner would be the war god. I think that guy from the clergy would come for me personally. The void walkers couldn't care less about it, but whatever little sentiments they held for the throne were magnified tenfolds among the steppe Khans. In the royal tipi, a white-hot quarrel was going on with two major sides. One side saw the change as an improvement, as the throne would belong to whoever had the power and capacity to protect it for themselves, while others believed that as the war god's sword was the symbol of their deity, so both traditionalist or otherwise should defend the sword from falling into the hands of an outsider. Whoa, brother, how about we put your faith in the sword to the test and have your men try to take that sword back from him? The Khan of Ashva clan loudly proclaimed. Unlike you, I have seen how he obliterated the men from the Blue Hawk clan. You should go and try that out. He was visibly calm as he had experienced a lot of ups and downs in just one morning. Not only that, being the strongest Khan among them, he had every political reason to advocate for a dismissal of the war god's sword. That greedy and foolish face of yours that covets the throne makes me sick. Altam, only a madman would be indifferent to the idea of handing the war god's sword to an outsider. Have you no fear for the war god's wrath? A Khan of a weaker clan, whose only hope for ever becoming a royal laid with the mysterious mandate of the sword, retorted. If our god is going to rain his wrath down on anyone, it would be on the grey fellow first. But look at him. He's completely unscathed. Does that not scream to you his acceptance of him being the new owner of the sword? The least we can do is to respect that divine decree. I'll admit that I have no idea if the war god would punish him. I have never seen such an incident myself, but if you send your men to retrieve that sword, maybe you can see for yourself his divine punishment. You spineless cowards, letting a thief steal the blessing that the war god had bestowed to us. All of you have no rights to claim that you are the war god's people. Oh, so you're the war god's people? Why, be my guest. Go take the sword back. It's not like we have never lived without the sword. And in history there were times when the king of the steppe did not inherit the sword. What's the big deal? Exactly. Look, if the sword is the ultimate mandate and power for a king, then explain how did that woman lose despite using the sword? A weapon can't defend your throne. Hence, the need to maintain this tradition is redundant. The fight went on. The majority's decision was apparent as most had no choice but to accept the reality. Fighting him to get that sword back, or casting all dignity and pride aside to pitifully beg him to remain as the king? Neither of those alternatives were plausible. Atty listened to the debate in the royal tipi, her mind returning to the prophecy. A disaster of blood and terror was brewing, and the tipi was the eye of the hurricane. Her people would be in a land of danger and frost, and yet, they would be far and safe from the bloody climate. Atty felt a surge of small relief at that small consolation. This demon, does he really care about me? Is he this enamored with my body, to the point of trying to gain my affections through this unique mean? She shook her head to dispel the thoughts. It was either a fortunate coincidence, or it was an elaborate tease, like a child poking and teasing their new pet. At first they treat you well because you're new, then they toss you aside after some time. Must I really leave the steppe and follow him back to the faraway and dangerous northern lands, becoming just a spectator to the bloodshed, unable to help the former king of the plain, chosen by the war god, remaining idle? Somewhere deep down the mind of the delirious girl, a new, radical idea was formed. Why not use his lust for you as an advantage? Submit to this demon, earn his trust, then steal the sword back from his hands and kill him while he is unguarded. She could even learn a few things from the people in the northern lands, or even the powers the demon had. Then when she returned, the sword in her hands and with new powers at her disposal, she could make the steppe truly great again. The full prophecy said the demon would bring destruction and glory to the steppe. The destruction has already happened, so what is the glory? Doesn't that refer to me? Her heart started racing. Me, that's right, this must be it. Although my body would be tainted by this filth, but it is a small price to pay to save the entire steppe. Even if she could not gain his complete trust, she could still help make her people's lives better. As long as she stuck to her plan, the risk would be small. The new wound on her body when he was finished with her, she would just think of it as a mad dog's bite. She was more and more sure of her own idea. The mark within my body didn't vanish even though I'd lost the war god's sword either. It just became dormant. Isn't this a testament that the war god had not abandoned me? Isn't all of this a test from him? Atty made a firm decision. Even if she was no longer the king, she would still sacrifice herself for the people and the steppe. She will remain by the demon's side, looking for the right opportunity. Just like a similar figure in Great Britain, Atty became king because of a sword's mandate. And just like that figure, they were both flat-chested and naive, like a knight material one would be. If Bai had known even a little of her thought process, he would have suggested for her to look into a career of story writing because that story she came up with in her head should not be wasted. Atty caught up with Bai after making her conclusion. Watching his back, she started thinking thinking about how to earn his trust. Although she had confidence in her beauty and body, but she was aware that it would be woefully insufficient compared to the even more alluring Undine, especially her chest. Her eyes went down to look at one of her flaws, only to see all the way down to her toes. Her view was completely unobstructed. Putting physical impairment aside, there was also the issue of her having zero experience in the art of seduction. She reflected on her past observations of women who always seemed to have a flock of males around them and concluded that a smile was perhaps the most basic step, then the intentional unintentional intimacy. She ran up to Bailey, her hand extended to grab his shoulder. That action froze in midair. She was still hesitant, being thin-skinned. After repeating her new mantra of "this is for the war god, this is for the people, this is for the step" nth number of times, she clenched her teeth and finally grabbed Bailey's shoulder. Yes, Bailey stopped and turned around to see the girl looking up at him, her face muscle twitching as she flashed him a full set of her teeth. No, she was probably trying to smile. Can this even be called a smile? It looks like it belongs in a slasher film. Needs a bit more of, well, actual mirth. You know, Bailey was dumbfounded as he had seen the girl's smile before. It was quite cute and completely normal. So what's with the grimace? Did she fried some of her circuits after falling onto the ground headfirst? He extended his hand to her forehead to see if she had caught a fever, but before he could reach her, Attie immediately shrinked back a little, her expression fearful like a kitty being caught in the middle of scratching her owner's furniture. What's with you? Bailey thought, but he did not dwell on it too much. He resumed walking with the girl by his side. On the other hand, Attie was furiously fanning herself, trying to cool herself down from the heat. She decided that she needed more mental preparation. She must put her pride down and really interact with the demon properly. Bailey was, of course, completely unaware of her mental labor. He finally found his mount nibbling grass in the royal court and climbed up. Then, using his mana, he lifted the girl up by her neck like a mother cat would on her kitten. Ah, Attie shouted out in surprise as she was tossed onto the back of his goat. She backed away from him, at the same time making sure that she didn't fall down. Her original seduce the demon battle plan was temporarily forgotten. Of course, Bailey saw her reluctance and repulsion towards him. He dismissed it and said reassuringly, "Time to go. You should look at your homeland for the last time." She nodded, still in shock. She looked on as the war goat trotted slowly. She saw the land she had been living on for years. She saw her people packing up their luggage, preparing to leave. The scene was oddly similar to how they had looked when they first came to the step. No one seemed to be seeing her off, but she didn't mind. She just watched on, greedily looking at everything to imprint them in her mind. She had already averted her gaze once the war goat had left the royal court, but then she heard a call from a familiar voice. "Attie, we'll be waiting for you in our new home." It was the elderly retainer and a few other uninjured guards, waving at her. There was not a shred of sadness in their farewell, just relief and the joy of finally being free. It was the familiar, yet also near forgotten smile that broke the levee. Attie finally burst into tears. Chapter 131. On their way back. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Because she was exhausted from all the trials and tribulations of that morning, Attie's swollen eyes, mired by her tears, began closing slowly until she slumped into slumber. With her resistance worn away as she slept, her body freely leaned on Bailey's back, her hands instinctively grabbing his cape. Glancing at her, the solar mature sighed. When she isn't being obstinate, this girl can be quite adorable. Huh? He dismounted from the goat so that Attie could lie down completely on its back. Bailey traveled like that for a while, leading the goat with Attie sleeping on its back. The surrounding area was quite chaotic. Everybody hurried from here to their minds occupied, so no one had bothered to stop or even noticed him. Bailey didn't mind. He simply hadn't had enough downtime to himself in a while. He found the divine warriors, who had been waiting outside. They were bored because no one dared to even get close to them. Who could blame them, really? So they had started a game that only alpine barbarians would call fun. One man would stand in the middle of the field, and another would knock on him hard to drill the man into the earth until only his head was the only thing that was exposed. The buried man would have to use his own strength to set himself free. The winner would be the one who could free himself in the shortest amount of time. It was Charcher's turn to free himself when Bailey met the trio. The buried divine warrior gave out a hoarse cry, his veins popping as he burst out from the earth. In the wake of his escape was a large gaping hole, similar to many other deep holes lying around. It didn't take much deduction skill to figure out that the game had been going on for a while. Haha, you're slower than me. I win. Zaza gave a hearty laugh. Is this even a game for humans? And to be buried like that, and still manage to free yourself? How could you extraterrestrials still maintain understanding and compassion for the common men anymore? Seeing Bailey watching them, Zaza waved eagerly at the prospect of a new challenger. Hey bro, wanna try? We normal people should not blindly follow the examples of these monsters, so I'll have to say no. Bailey shook his head very quickly at his invitation. He wasn't worried about not being able to free himself. He was worried that he would not be drilled into the hole. Instead, his whole frame would collapse like a house of cards when they started to pound him. It is done. Let's go, Bailey said to divert their attention. He looked back at the slumbering Atty, then lowered his voice. We got our person, we got the object we were looking for, and I think these barbarians wouldn't dare disturb the Alpine people anymore. After hearing the news, the three divine warriors' faces fell as their eyes enlarged in sadness. Their big boys' toys had been taken away. Cha-Cha looked down as he said in a sad, low voice, now what can we do when we are bored? You bully your god-owned neighbors because you were bored. Huskar did not say anything immediately, but after looking around with a wistful expression, he finally said, I'm going to miss it here. Everything outside of home is always so exciting. I had so much fun on this excursion. You slayed their A-teams and elite soldiers in one go. Don't tell me that wasn't fun enough. Even Zaza had a few kind words to say. Brother Hope, thank you so much for such a fun trip. If there is ever another chance like this, you must invite us. We'll have another javelin throwing match while we play with other toys. That warmed Bailey's heart. It might have sounded juvenile, but the real meaning behind it was that Bailey could always rely on his help. It was a powerful promise. Even if most battles would be just a game to Zaza himself. The Huskar eyed the girl on the goat's back. Who is that ugly chick? My new servant, Bailey replied without much thought. Servant? The trio's face were blank. Obviously, the term was foreign to them. There weren't much people in Harrogath, so there wasn't much need for social order. If it was a family business, the family or the person themselves solved it. If it involved others, then a small discussion between the parties would commence. And lastly, if it was a thing too big for the living to decide, they would just go to their ancestors. The Huskar might be the leader of the Divine Warriors on paper, but there was no concept of social caste or division between classes of people based on birth. The concept of a servant girl was, therefore, beyond their understanding. They immediately rationalized it into one of the roles women in Harrogath could have, a wife or a consort of some sort. Being the helpful frat bro that he was, the Huskar could not contain himself. Brother Hope, your taste is frankly too terrible. Just bad. You can attract so many more women with your strength. Why must you settle down with a hideous one like this? Bailey also could not help but slapped his own forehead, at loss for words. Those people's rigid beauty standards were beyond ridiculous. Without the grace of a leopard, the power of a gazelle, and the flexibility of a viper, no woman could possibly be beautiful, is it? Good looks? Well, those don't help in battles, does it? Perhaps roused by hearing someone talking about her, Atty woke up blurrily. She almost burst into tears when she saw three looming figures staring at her. Did that demon just offer me up to these three alpine monsters for a feast? Of course. Her dread was short-lived, because she quickly picked up the foul expression on their faces, as if they were staring at rotten food. She took that as them not being interested in gobbling her up, and proceeded to politely greet them, even introducing herself as Bailey's servant. The trio continued wallowing in Bailey's unfortunate choice of a wife/consort. While answering Atty disinterestedly, she took the opportunity to talk about how Bailey got his hand on the war god's sword. Deep down, she still couldn't believe the soul armature's words. Oh, him? Oh, yes, pretty okay for a fighter. Looks weird, but he was a speedy bruiser, with some very creepy fighting techniques. The Huskar gave pretty good review of Sven the Rogue Knight, but he continued. He wasn't good enough to beat Brother Hope though, so he lost. If you ask me, Brother Hope shouldn't use that shiny stick to fight him. Bad choice of weapon. Should have used my javelin, then he could have easily forced the last breath out of his lungs when it pierced through his chest. Zaza added in. Atty was dumbfounded. She knew the Alpine people long enough to know that they would not lie. Judging from the Divine Warrior's words, all that the demon had said, did happened. He did coincidentally met that man, and defeated him, and obtained the sword. Could so many coincidences happen at the same time? Or was it the sword's will that led to all the coincidences? The latter was possible. Her own story with the sword was just as full of coincidences and fate, as if the war god himself had orchestrated the entire sequence. If the war god had mandated for this to happen, then Atty's doubt towards Bailey lessened a bit more. Of course what the Divine Warriors recounted did happen, but there was only one actor. With Mia's power breakthrough, new powers opened themselves up to Bailey, and one of them was controlling his other body like a puppet using mana. So he had put up a good show in front of the trio using two of his bodies. To mask the fight well, he even chose the venue of his fight at a place the trio could see, but not too clearly to the point of recognizing him. In that state of vagueness, Bailey upped the ante using the charlatan's tricks. Disguising Sven's look, illusions tricks would always be perfect to be used against barbarians, no matter if they were from the Alpines or the steppes. He spent considerable efforts planning a big show like that because he wanted to distance himself from his past disguise as Sven the Rogue Knight. People might doubt his story, but not many would be suspicious towards the famed honesty of the Alpine barbarians. The charlatan sometimes used that technique to dispel the distrust and suspicion against himself. Although it was slightly overused, it was nonetheless effective. It lessened some of Atty's doubts, and Bailey had no doubt it could trick others, too. Let's just call this a white lie. No one's hurt by it. Bailey did not interfere with their conversation, but he read the girl's face and had surmised that she had bought the story. The next part of the plan is simple: bring the rightful owner of the war god's sword back to the northern lands and then conduct research on her body and its connection to the sword. Once he had gotten the results, Bailey would then decide if he would set the girl free with the sword returned to her, or let her remain by his side. Thinking about his research made Bailey a little impatient. He wanted to quickly reach their rendezvous point, but the Huskar was obviously enjoying the trip as he slowed down his speed. After a while, Cuckoo returned to Zaza. After a brief conversation between the two, Zaza turned to Bailey. Cuckoo says, there is a group of people heading towards towards your friend's place. Bailey was stunned, but very quickly recovered. Oh, a little mishap. Well, a group of how many people? Cuckoo says, about 10. Oh, I wouldn't worry about it then. Although the strength of the original rescue team was unimpressive to Bailey, but they were a pretty solid team. There were the defense fighter, the range and magical fighting young sorcerer, and the supporting chaplain. Coupled with the experience of the three Jang brothers, along with the support from Mew and Tisdale and a recuperating butterfly Saint of Swords, an enemy of Den would not be too difficult. Still, prior to leaving Mia behind, Bailey had left some spying magic on the hammerhead shark plushie. As long as Mia had the plushie with her, he could use its eyes to scan the surrounding as well. At the thought of that, he activated the spell to check on their status, and saw smooth, ivory mounds with a deep cleavage between them. Half of the hills were submerged in water. Chapter 132. Whose turn is it this time? This chapter is updated by novels.pl. What the hell is this? Bailey was perplexed. Quickly, he used the doll's field of vision to observe the surrounding. Both on the left and right sides were images of lotus-like soft and fair arms that were soaking themselves in hot water, and at the back of the doll was actually a bare back. From the delicate silky texture and familiar curves, it must belong to a certain little girl. Bailey rapidly activated the hearing ability, and just in time, he heard a gentle voice chuckling. T.E., your skin is so soft. Mia, it's just like silk. Is that Undyne's voice? Same goes to you, sis Undyne. This is my first time seeing such a beautiful beautiful person in real life. Mia's familiar voice rang in his ear. What the freak are you guys doing? Why are you people taking a hot bath during daytime? And the two of you together, too? Why did you even bring the hammerhead shark doll with you into the bath? I did not ask you to do that at all. Okay, Bay yelled in his mind. Before they bade goodbye, he had handed over a storage pouch that contained all sorts of everyday items to Tisdale. Inside, there were all kinds of clothings and other than soft blankets and quilts. There were also the big bathtub that he had made for Mia. At first he did not want to bring that thing over, but then he was worried that Mia would suddenly want to take a bath during the journey, so in the end, he took apart the tub and shoved them into the storage pouch. Still, he never thought that Tisdale would notice the bathtub and put the pieces back together again. On top of that, it looked like she had used her magic to heat the water up so that they could soak in a warm bath comfortably. Since they had been out on the journey, she had only been using a cleaning spell to clean her body up hastily, and of course, how could it compare to lying comfortably in a hot bath? And since Tisdale was a generous person, it was natural for her to share such a good thing with her other sisters. At first, Undine was opposed to the idea, as it was indeed improper to relax in a hot bath in such a dangerous place. Still, not being able to resist the temptation of the hot bath, she decided to join in for a while. Well, nobody could blame her after all. In the period of time when she was kept in captivity by the barbarians, her shower method was being splashed with a cold bucket of water every day from her head to her toes. Adding on to the rolling and tossing by Bay, she was fully covered in grass and debris. Of course she would want to wash all of those away. Since there seems to be no movements in the surrounding, there should be no problem if I take a quick bath, right? Undine, who had just gotten her freedom back, thought to herself. In order to save time, she dragged the petite little Mia to join her in the bath as well, knowing that the other men, their bodyguards, would never dare to even think about peeping at Mia's naked body. Bringing her is the best method to prevent them from peeping at her. As for the hammerhead shark plushie, well, Mia had followed Bay's order and kept it by her side every second of the day. Since Undine happened to like the plushie as well, she might as well bring it together with her to the bath to use as a bath cloth to wipe her chest. Who would have ever thought that Bay would activate the spell at such a time? Anyway, it really was a misunderstanding. I hope they'd be fast. At least finish their bath before the enemy finds them. Still, I really hope that they will cover their bodies properly before they come out from the bath. Otherwise, the 3 Iron Trio will turn blind and the 3 Jang brothers will become the 3 blind brothers. Bay cursed under his breath. In truth, he was not that worried about them. As long as Mia had the hammerhead shark plushie with her, their safety would not be a problem. As a matter of fact, he was more worried that his Womert students might be seen by other people, cutting off the connection between the doll and himself. He hissed at the void. We should install a communication magic on the doll. Are you making a puppet or building a battleship? The blacksmith chuckled. Before Bay could answer them, the void was suddenly filled with immense vibrations, as if somebody was feeling furious. Not long after, a few voices could be heard. Sigh. I can't believe that a dignified holy paladin such as myself would get a supper treatment compared to a hammerhead shark plushie. It's enjoying its bath with cute little girls while I'm squatting at a black prison. Sir Hope, please activate that spell again, even if it's just for a little while. Please you can ban me for as long as you like after that. Even though you've just gotten your hand on a delicious beautiful tanned girl, I still think Mia is the best. Please let me become the hammerhead shark doll. Looks like the silence spell on these hentai walkers have just lifted in time. Bay thought but decided not to ban them again. Let them just say whatever they want. I'll just ignore them. Then, he turned his body sideways and looked at Atty, who was riding on a goat behind while keeping a fixed distance from him. Before Bay could open his mouth to ask her, she already guessed what he was going to ask so swiftly. She explained, they should be the scouting team that the other clans have dispatched early in the morning today. I think they probably guessed that somebody would be waiting for the beautiful woman after her escape. After the scouting team has left, nobody has managed to notify them in time, so they're still on the move. It's alright, they will be fine, Bay casually replied. You're not worried about your comrades? Atty asked tentatively. There's nothing to be worried about, they can take care of themselves, Bay announced calmly. The reason why he was not worried at all was because first, he knew the hammerhead shark doll was with them at that moment, and second, he wanted to let Mia and Tisdale fight their own battles a few more times so that they could hone their combat skills. Shortly after they continued on their slow journey, Bay felt uneasy all of a sudden. The hammerhead shark doll is actually unleashing the Aurora's mercy now? What's going on? There's only a dozen of the enemy, right? How is it possible for those people to back the strong rescue team into a corner without wasting any time? He quickly linked himself to the hammerhead shark doll again before cutting off the communication within seconds. Turning towards Zaza, he asked anxiously, Brother Zaza, you told me that only a dozen people are making their way to my men, right? Yeah, around there. Cuckoo told me, lying on the goat's back comfortably while chewing a grass root in his mouth. He casually answered. Bay slapped his forehead hard. How could he believe the mathematical skills of a bird and a barbarian? In truth, there were about 200 people from the cavalry who were locked in battle with the rescue team. Before, when he tried to survey the condition, he had chosen the wrong time and found himself in an awkward position watching the 2 girls bathe, so he decided to stop. In the end, he decided to just take Zaza's word for what it was. It was either the Alpine Hawk Eagle did not know how to count, or perhaps it had myopia, or perhaps it had a problem in communication, thus resulting in the rescue team being stuck in an arduous battle. After Bay had cut off his link with the hammerhead shark doll the first time, Undine had also finished her bath just in time. Swiftly, she changed into the nightwear that Tisdale had prepared for her, a short lacy skirt, black stockings and a deep v-neck top that went all the way down to her navel. Mia changed back into her previous clothes that covered her up fully. Mimicking Bay, she used her mana to extract the water out from her beloved doll. As for the other other men. They were looking around at their surrounding, but somehow, they appeared to be slacking. The long journey had made them tired, and after Undyne was rescued, their mission had already been accomplished. What was left to do was to wait for Bailey to come meet them at the meeting point. Even the goats thought it was safe. Added to the fact that they did not like those group of foreigners very much, they went on their own to look for food. And that was the exact time the barbarians' cavalry was making their ways towards them. The youngest Zhang brother was the first person to discover the cavalry. Just as he was about to issue an alert to the rest of the rescue team, he was shot at his thigh by an arrow. Lifting up his dragon dagger, he wanted to fight them with all his might, but unfortunately, he was kicked hard in the chest by one of the horses and fainted immediately on the spot. The rest of the Zhang brothers wanted to save him, so they refused to flee. Seeing that, Undyne did not want to give up on those people who had traveled for thousands and thousands of miles just to save her, so she refused to escape as well. Just like that, a battle broke out on the spot. By the time the defense fighter had managed to snatch the youngest Zhang brother back from the enemy with the help of the sorcerer and the chaplain, the rescue team had already been surrounded by the cavalry regiment. The few war goats who were on their way back had their attention diverted by several other cavalries who led them to other places. It was fortunate that Mia and Tisdale performed quite well in the battle. Using the scrolls that Bailey had prepared beforehand, they managed to inflict a lot of damage on the barbarians. At the same time, Undyne had also regained some of her strength, and by virtue of those three beautiful girls, the rescue team was able to defend themselves from the enemy who outnumbered them. Still, it was a strenuous battle for them. After a round of fierce battle, the three Zhang brothers had suffered major injuries and could no longer continue to fight. The sorcerer and the chaplain were both as pale as ghosts, as they had fully exhausted their mana. The defense fighter were fully covered in injuries, gasping hard for breath as he leaned on his tower shield. Undyne and Tisdale had also used up all of their Kai prowess and mana, clinging at each other trying to gulp down more potions to recover their strength. Mia was the only one left standing. Although she was like a spent arrow whose energy had been fully depleted, the barbarians more or less met with the same fate as them, too. More than half of the people had died and only a few dozens were left standing. Slowly approaching little Mia till refused to give up. Without warning, Mia lifted her hammerhead shark doll high up and shouted angrily, "Bite them, Sharky." Once again, the hammerhead's fury reappeared and the overwhelming offense took at least a dozen barbarians out in just a flash. The rest of the barbarians were startled, rooted to the ground, not daring to make any rash move at all. In truth, Mia's lack of combat experience could be clearly seen. The timing of the spell and the choice of target was not that appropriate. Had she calmed down and waited a few moments more, the Aurora's mercy could finish off the remaining barbarians in a go. Because her final death blow was not able to defeat her enemy, Mia was once again plunged into a critical situation. Those barbarians seemed to know that such powerful magic was not able to be launched continuously, so they came out from their hiding spots and slowly made their way to Mia. In such a critical moment, Mia, who was torn in confusion, made a surprising decision. Hugging her hammerhead shark doll tightly, she suddenly sprang into a quick run towards another direction. It turned out that she actually wanted to divert the enemy's attention and give the others an opportunity to escape. Catch that little girl first, don't give her another chance to cast her spell. An order was given from the barbarian side. Soon, the sound of hooves could be heard coming hastily behind her. "Stop, Mr. Hope. Where are you, Mr. Hope?" Mia choked out in a low voice. She was very scared that she would trip and fall on the ground, and lose her hammerhead shark doll in the process. And Bailey, who witnessed the whole scene through the eyes of the hammerhead shark plushie, asked the void in a voice so quiet that would make people shudder in fear, "Now, whose turn is it to have a go right now?" Chapter 133. He's the most suitable candidate. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Ugh. That hurts. Mia was lying on the ground struggling hard to get her feet back on the ground. However, the sounds of horse hooves approaching made her tremble in fear. Her whole body went weak as her knees gave out once again. It was all she could do to turn her body over just in time to see the barbarian cavalries charging at her. It was the first time she faced such a life-threatening situation all by herself. Unlike last time in the ring when she was facing the Lindworm, there were no Bai or the referee by her side this time. Did they manage to escape? Even in such a dangerous situation, Mia still put other people above herself first. In the void, chaos was taking place as all of the walkers who were awake were all volunteering to help Mia. Even the scholar offered to enter the doll's body. Still, Bai ignored all of their requests. He had a better candidate in mind for such a situation. Slowly gathering his consciousness, he poked hard at a walker who was deep in sleep. "Wake up! Wake up, I need your strength." The other void walkers suddenly felt a special consciousness slowly awakened in the void. It was as if a very terrible beast was opening its eyes slowly. Accompanied by his awakening was an invisible ominous force that was slowly spreading out in every corner of the void. It was so chilling that even the other void walkers were stifled by its presence. Only the sorcerer was able to force a whisper out. "That is the 27th walker, isn't it?" "Yeah, perhaps he's the best choice among us. It seems like this walker is a little special," the scholar whispered as well. I don't really know him that well. Other than Hope, he had never interacted with any of us before. It's normal that you know nothing about him. I just didn't expect that Hope would wake him up. He's actually really powerful, and probably the most suitable candidate for our current situation. The Archmage added in a low voice as well. However, faced with such an existence that could fill the other Void Walkers with dread, Bai changed his tone into an almost imperative tone from his usual friendly and amiable attitude as he ordered, "Go, protect her." At the same time, he shared his most recent memory with the 27th Walker, who was clueless about the current development of the situation as he spent most of his time deep in his slumber in the void. The walker quickly went through Bai's memory since his summoning. The walker remained quiet and merely used his consciousness to express his understanding. "This is your territory, right? Don't let me down," Bai added before he activated the spell. The 27th walker stirred again, leaving all the curious and awed void walkers silent as they tried to listen to his voice. It was so quiet as if they were about to listen to a dragon speaking in human language. To their surprise, what came out from the 27th walker was only a word "woof." It was just a bark. The void was stunned into a deeper silence. "How many times do I have to tell you? Stop barking like a dog," Bai bellowed, but the 27th walker had already inserted his consciousness into the hammerhead shark doll. Within seconds, the hammerhead shark plushie shook its tail and its soft fluffy body flew up suddenly before it threw itself into Mia's embrace and rubbed furiously on her face. Although it might look like a very ordinary action, somehow it felt like the doll was acting like a dog licking on the girl's face. "Eh, Sharky?" Mia was dumbfounded. "Are you here to protect me again?" The hammerhead shark doll shook its head at her, as if trying to deny it. And without warning, it lifted up its head and frantically flapped its short fins, making it look like a dried marinated fish that was about to drown in deep sea. After finishing such a weird action, it swam to Mia's front and put itself between her and the cavalries. Owing to the fact that the doll had just had a warm bath with the girls, its body was still soaked in water, making it look especially klutzy swimming in the air. It was totally unlike the sleekness it had when it was possessed by the warrior last time. Is this fella fine?" the Thane asked worriedly. "Don't worry, although it may be a little dumb, it's actually quite loyal and reliable," Bai answered in the void before explaining the situation to the Huskar and his two sidekicks. With haste, the five of them kicked up their pace and promptly made their way towards the base camp. The base campsite that Bei had chosen for them was very close to the EOL mountains. Just a little distance more across the dense jungle and they would find themselves in the Alpine Barbarians' territory. Mia was actually right outside the dense forest of the no man's land between the grassland and the mountains. The cavalries who still had some strength left were all basically gathered right in front of Mia. Still, they slowed down their pace when they reached her as they dreaded the terrible magic that she had unleashed earlier. The moment they made sure that the little girl was not able to run nor resist anymore, Mia was merely sitting on the ground rubbing her knees. Their courage once again returned to them. Because riding on the horses would be inconvenient for them to dodge a magic spell, they dismounted from their rides and gradually encircled her. "Be careful. We want the woman alive," the cavalry leader who survived due to sheer luck commanded. He had studied the girl's beauty before and he knew that if he managed to bring them back alive, he would get a hefty sum of rewards in return. What he did not know was that he probably would only get his reward in the netherworld. "She had killed so many of our brothers and we still want her alive? Okay, fine. Then, let her taste some hardship first." Someone beside the leader complained with dissatisfaction. That bow in his hand that was already pulled back was forced to change its target to her thigh from her heart. Before the leader could stop him, a sharp burst of whoosh sound echoed in the forest as he released his arrow. Without warning, a weird doll leapt up and blocked the arrow when it was soaring in the midair. The arrow pierced through the soft fluffy doll with its arrowhead protruding out the other side. The force was so strong that the doll was overturned multiple times before it finally stopped the arrow from its track. "Sharky," Mia shouted worriedly. The hammerhead shark plushie did not reply her. Instead, like a monster whose fury has been aroused, it charged towards the cavalry with full power, the arrow still sticking out from its abdomen. One of the cavalries simply took his saber and punctured the doll's abdomen, skewering it. The doll was too slow in its movements due to the heavy water in its body. "What in God's name is this?" The cavalry kept his saber close to him and observed the hammerhead shark plushie carefully. Dumbfounded, he asked, "Is this some sort of toy?" Then, without warning, he shook of his saber and threw the doll in the fast distance. Where it finally landed on the grass, all of the other walkers who were watching the scene exclaimed in unison, "Are you sure he's really capable?" "Of course. What are you guys so anxious about?" "I'm not even worried at all," Bei replied. "There's not much mana left in the doll, so even if you guys are the one entering it, you'd not be able to do much anyway. Besides, there are still quite a number of enemies left and he is the only one who is able to protect our little Mia." As if it was responding to Bei's words, when the cavalry was about to tie Mia up with a rope, flocks of birds suddenly soared up from the dense forest behind. To people who possessed some knowledge about hunting, that was usually a sign that a predator was approaching. The cavalries immediately halted their movements and took out their sabers and arrows, staring intensely at the forest behind Mia as if a huge enemy was about to show itself. "Watch out," the leader shouted, "get on your horses." Just as he finished his words, a string of plop 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 sounds suddenly resonated from behind. Quickly, they turned to have a look and was shocked to find that all of their horses were all kneeling one by one strangely at the forest in front of them. The horses that originally had their noses high were now bowing down so low that they were almost touching the ground. It was as if they were showing obeisance towards that something that was about to appear from the forest. The cavalry leader gulped in fear. Cold sweat that was forming on his forehead slowly trickled down his face, although he still had no idea what was behind those trees. But judging from the horses' reaction, it was definitely an existence that they would never be able to defeat. Other than those savage alpine barbarians, there were still many things that were beyond their powers that lived in the EOL mountains. "Retreat." The leader only managed to utter a word before he was suddenly frozen in place. His legs began to shiver uncontrollably. It was because standing in front of him was a beast that was as huge as a small hill that appeared all of a sudden from thin air. The beast looked a little like a gigantic gorilla who was covered from top to bottom in white mane. Its feet were standing upright, its hands were equipped with horrifyingly sharp claws and the 2 rows of sharp teeth gave off a sickening chill. Behemoth. A cavalry who had heard of the monster before, trembled with fear. Why did it suddenly show up here? According to the description of their tribal shaman, the ominous beast had been living in the depths of the EOL mountains. They liked to eat a special type of red crystal that could only be found there and that was why they rarely appeared in the grassland. When it's still in its infancy period, it was only about 12 to 18 feet tall and its mane was grey in color. As they grew older, their mane would fade to become greyish white and they could reach 30 to 40 feet tall. Looking back at the behemoth that was about 60 feet tall with its pure white mane, one could not help but wonder, how old exactly was the beast, and how immense was the power that it possessed? The cavalry did not dare to think any further than that. What was more peculiar was why such a big monster appeared suddenly right in front of those people. Even Mia was aghast by the sudden emergence of such a hideous monster. She was so terrified that she almost fainted in fear. As she was about to faint, she saw the hammerhead shark doll suddenly creeping up to the head of the behemoth. With the arrow still lodged in its abdomen, it was using its head to tap the beast's head, as if it was expressing its dissatisfaction. The phantom behemoth. The scholar who was well informed asked suddenly in the void, "My goodness, I thought this gigantic beast only exists in legend. I never thought that it would really exist in this world. And, the 27th walker is able to command it. This is exactly why I said that he's the most reliable candidate among us all." Bei smirked. Chapter 134. A Peculiar Life. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. When Bei and the rest reached the campsite, the battle was already over. The ground was fully covered with the bodies from the cavalries, but no sight of their horses could be seen at all. On the contrary, the rescue team was in a good condition, other than the 3 Jang brothers and the defense fighter who were severely injured. The others were safe and sound. Mia was sitting alone on the grass outside the camp with the hammerhead shark doll placed on her legs. With a sad face, she stroked the gash on the plushie's white belly, and somehow, the plushie looked like it was enjoying the treatment. Wagging its tail leisurely, it would rub the back of Mia's hand from time to time. The scene looked very much like Inona comforting her wounded pet. Huskar, who came along with Bei, suddenly hopped down from the goat before he even got close to Mia. With a flash, he pulled a spear out of Zaza's back and jumped in front of the others. In a loud voice, he yelled, "Watch out!" At the same time, the image that had appeared before on the battlefield re-emerged again behind him. Concurrently, the 2 divine warriors also detected something as they rapidly hopped down from their goats, and just like Huskar, they summoned their ancestors and with spears in their hand, they stared fiercely at the direction that the Huskar was staring at. Even Etty was frowning and bent her waist slightly, ready to attack at any time. However, the place that they were staring at was an empty space next to Mia. To the naked eyes, there was nothing there except for blue sky and lush green grass. Bei quickly waved his hand and tried to control the situation. "Relax guys, it's here to help us." Having said that, he whistled and the hammerhead shark doll that Mia was holding broke from her embrace and swam swiftly towards Bei, snuggling up against his visor. Was this guy a dog? Noticing Bei's return, a joyful smile filled Mia's face at once, just as she was about to throw herself into his embrace. The Huskar suddenly yelled out fiercely in their barbarian language, "Stay there." Even though Mia did not understand the word that he said, she was startled by such a loud shout that she stopped in her track. "Relax, guys, it's really alright." Bei quickly calmed them down. At the same time, he tapped the head of the hammerhead shark plushie that was snuggling up against his stomach, expressing to him that he should deal with the situation quickly. Without warning, a 60 feet wide behemoth suddenly materialized out of thin air on the empty ground beside Mia. It glanced at Bei's plushie before slowly backing away a few steps and disappeared again into thin air. As if sensing the beast had left, the Huskar deactivated the golden light on his body and let out a sigh of relief as he whispered, "He's gone," before he returned the spear to Zaza casually. Previously, when he was locked in that intensive battle with the steppe barbarians, he only used his fists to fight with enemies, but the first thing that he did just now was to take a spear from Zaza the moment he sensed that beast. One could easily imagine what a terrifying existence the behemoth was. Zaza took back the spear and looked back at Cuckoo the alpine hawk eagle, who was paralyzed with fear on the goat before lowering his head down and muttered, "That thing was really ghastly. I've never felt fear for so many years already, and just now, I actually had a taste of it again. Fortunately it was already full, or otherwise," Huskar murmured as he looked at the bodies on the ground and did not continue saying anything anymore. Based on his judgment, with only the 4 of them, they were absolutely no match for that behemoth. Without a doubt, the behemoth that could force the fearless and peerless divine warriors to bow their heads down in surrender had already created a chaos in the void. That time when I came across that monster, we both had chosen to part ways and did not cross swords with each other, the caveman explained. I did ask my ancestors about it later on, and they told me that it was not cowardice but a wise choice indeed. There was some record about this phantom behemoth in the Goov realm. The Dragon Knight troop encountered them when they were reclaiming a realm and dispatched hundreds of their Dragon Knight to take them down. In the end, only a dozen of those knights came back and 300 of them died battling just 3 of those phantom behemoths. I saw the record in the journal that I found in one matriarch's tomb. That was probably the biggest loss the Dragon Knight had faced in their entire history. The adventurer joined in the conversation. No wonder when the realm of Isthar started the upsurge in reclaiming realms, there were no movements at all in the Goov realm. Now I understand why, the youngest walker, the apprentice, said. Rumor has it that the behemoth is slightly different from ordinary behemoth. They seem to possess some sort of special ability that allow them to move between realms and hide between the invisible cracks in between the realms. Or could it be that they use these cracks to travel swiftly? Yeah, it's something like that. This phantom behemoth must have a special ability in this field. It's because they are like a phantom who can appear or disappear without trace that they were given this name, phantom behemoth. Bei supported his view. It's exactly because of this that the behemoth could rush from the EOL mountains to protect Mia in such a short amount of time. The reason why the phantom behemoth posed such a big threat to even a Huskar was exactly the extraordinary ability that it possessed. With that ability, it could easily sneak an attack or dodge the opponent's attack. A phantom behemoth that could turn invisible along with its sturdy body and immense power was like a divine warrior who mastered the assassin's sneak. One could easily imagine how troublesome it would be if one were to come across it suddenly. Wow, what a peculiar creature that is blessed with such amazing natural ability. But hold on, how come the 27th walker can control it? Could it be that he is that? The apprentice seemed to recall something and asked again. That's right, he is a terrifying magical creature that was named by you guys as the realm's blight. Bei announced the real identity of the 27th walker. The reason why he doesn't interact much with you guys is because he doesn't know how to communicate with other people. It's really the 27th walker. Their warrior, who was usually taciturn, joined in the conversation as well. I heard that the Northern Kingdom had sent many warriors to hunt it down, but too bad I was still young that time, so I couldn't join that quest. I only saw his information on a book later on, and I remembered that he was called the King of the Wasteland in the Northern Kingdom. You should be grateful that you didn't join that quest. The engineer broke his usual silence and said, according to the records of our our trade unions. Many blacksmiths and large-sized magical marionette were dispatched that time, and in the end, none of the people who went came back. It was said that there were around 10 holy level beings and countless immortal level beings who joined the quest. Many major guilds were involved in that quest, too. In the end, 3 of the holy level beings were sacrificed, and it was only when the church joined in that they were able to exile him. Now that I think about it, it still sounds very horrifying to me. What? The number that it took to hunt this creature down is actually more than mine? I can't believe that there's an even more terrible existence than mine. The Lich mocked. Actually, it's not that he's better in fighting than you are, but he's just good in escaping and sneak attacks. Bailey explained. At first he was just a very normal helminth who lived in the EOL mountains since a long time ago. All he did was preying on small worms when he was hungry. He did not even know what species it was. Then, by eating them, he slowly obtained their abilities and became powerful in that process. Gradually, he began to eat more and more, and his prey began to change into preys that were bigger and more powerful. By the time he had started to prey on dragons and behemoths, his power had already become so strong that he was beyond control. In the end, he slowly found the food in the EOL mountains to be boring and started to hunt for other food at other places, creating problems for human beings of different realms. Eventually, humans started to hunt it down. Well, that's basically his whole life. Isn't it simple yet boring? Bailey roughly retold the life story of the 27th Walker. In another word, all he did was constantly pursue for power. Too bad I never got the chance to encounter it. Their warrior concluded with some regret. No, he's not that complicated. He was merely hungry and wanted to look for more good food. Instead of saying he was eager for power, looking for food is more like it. Still, it didn't grow much of a brain after eating so much. After he had exchanged his memory with me and got to know all of Earth's cultures, he wanted to become panda, you know. Bailey added. Why a panda? Somebody asked. Because he would be fed all the time without needing to worry about getting starved or hunted. On top of that, it's the favorite animal of many people. Bailey chuckled. He's actually very lazy. If it wasn't for the fact that he needed to become stronger due to the constant hunting from human being, he would not have turned into what he is right now in the first place. Well, as of now, since there's nothing to eat in the void at all, he decided to just hibernate and sleep his time away. Then why did he act like a dog suddenly? Another curious walker asked. Oh, cause he realized that he would never become a panda with his appearance, so he decided to just become a pet, since by his logic, it's more or less the same anyway. Just because I was an earthling who would basically keep all sorts of animals as pets, coupled with the fact that I don't mind his appearance at all, he decided to stick to me and treats me as his owner. Bailey continued. In truth, he not only knows how to bark, he can meow too. You know, when he was finally exiled, he looked like a gigantic bee that has 2 forelimbs and 2 sharp spikes on his back. He could fly in a very high speed and is particularly agile and lethal. He added again. Oh, yes, I remember that when I was still alive, there was a divine weapon that was forged using its carcass. The scholar chimed in. Anyway, because of his appearance and the 2 sharp spikes on his back, I intended to call him Two-Thorned Salamander at first, but he didn't like this name much. Instead, he seems to be fond of this name Toty1, so I decided to just call him Monster. Bailey briefly explained the reasoning behind his nickname before he added again. But then, don't disregard him just because you think he is unambitious and stupid. In truth, his strength is actually very powerful, and the reason that Phantom Behemoth listened to him is because it is no match for him at all. The moment that Behemoth sensed his aura, it quickly rushed over to help him no time. As expected from the legendary king of the wasteland. Even after such a long time had gone by, there are still people who remember his existence. Their warrior added. When that conversation was taking place in the void, the duration that it took in the realm of reality was actually just a very short time. Mia seemed to have noticed the departure of her temporary protector, and longingly, she looked towards the direction of the forest and whispered, Mr. Snowman left already? Then, waving her hand at the distance, she shouted in a loud crisp voice, thank you, Mr. Snowman. A question mark appeared in Bailey's head at once. He did not understand why that girl would link a snowman to the ferocious creature. Chapter 135. The skies set you aflame. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. After sending Mr. Snowman away, Mia quickly turned around and buried her head into Bae's embrace. Her sentiment was plain to see as she squeezed her eyes shut in childlike glee, hugging his waist tightly and rubbing her cheeks against his chest. Bae returned her gesture with a soft pat on her head. Did that frighten you? Mia wanted to shake her head, but decided against putting up a bravado and just nodded honestly. Looking up at Bae's face, she flashed him a docile smile. Good thing Mr. Snowman came just in time. I'm not scared anymore. Her gaze turned downwards to the hammerhead plushie bound to Bae's abdomen, and her voice turned less gleeful. Sharky hurt itself because of me though, as it should be, Bae replied reassuringly. He quickly took the plushie away from its spot and dispelled the secret spell enchanted on it, returning the monster back to the void. Then, as he had done many times in the past, he used threads made from his own mana to stitch up the tear on the plushie's belly. With his dexterity, the plushie returned to normal in no time. There you go. He handed the plushie back to her. Wow, thanks, Mr. Hope. Her smile returning, she took her Sharky from his hand and rubbed its white belly with her cheeks again. Her face fell a little when she remembered something. Too bad Sharky can't move again. It will rise again to protect you, I promise. Not only that, it will protect you. Everyone inside rushes to protect you, and everyone here is a heavyweight in their respective field. Young lady, you're even more privileged than a spoiled princess of an empire. Bae took her hand and started towards the direction of their campsite just as the divine warrior and Ati had regrouped themselves as well. The Soul Armature first checked on the Jang brothers' injury. Little bro Jang seems to have suffered the worst damage of all, as his bronchitis was severed from the attack. The chaplain's desperate rescue had of course forcibly snatched him back from the Grim Reaper's scythe, but an injury like that was still irreversible. It seemed that there was no future in being an explorer for little bro Jang anymore. At least, he could start his aspired domestic life without any consternation. The rest of the party was also wounded in some way or another, but those were mostly non-lethal external injuries. They were easily treated by the chaplain's magic as well as the Dole family's nectar potion, and the party recuperated. After watching a few members of the party carrying the seriously injured Jang, whose hands were still clenched on his dagger, back into their tent, the chaplain finally had time for a breal. He replenished his mana with a mana potion and wiped the beads of sweat on his forehead. Looks like the situation still managed to turn grim enough to need me. Ha, he sighed. I really had hoped that this rescue mission could end without any incidents. The defense knight, meanwhile, brought a tied-up captive to Bae. The captive was, of course, one of the cavaliers who was instructed to kidnap Mia. He had long lost the bluster a soldier had before a battle. He was shaking in his boots even as he stood, as if he could not wipe away the image of the monster he had seen off from his mind. One could hardly blame him. His comrades were nowhere to be seen. Not that their whereabouts were unknown. The phantom behemoth had only left because it was full. Not bad, Bae said, looking at the slightly unsatisfied monster back in the void. You executed my orders perfectly. The order was simple. The monster was not allowed to scare Mia with its appearance, and it was not supposed to kill off every enemy. Bae wanted at least one to be left alive for questioning, and the monster had delivered exactly that. The monster's face brightened up at his compliment, and started getting excited. Its consciousness ran around him in circles, and even prepared to leap forward for a sloppy lick. Bae was, of course, mildly repulsed at the display of dog-like affection, so he hurriedly cried, fine, I get it. I'll feed you bamboo shoots the next time I get a chance. Looks like someone hasn't given up on their lofty dreams of evolving into a panda. 1. Back to reality. Bae studied the pale face of their captive, while the man returned the look with a quick scan with his own darting eyes. As the man looked down in fear again, Bae turned to Ati, who was standing at his side. Talk to him. When the captive saw the king he was accustomed to, he knelt instinctively, his head touching the ground as he begged his king to save him. Ati almost too readily assumed her old regal bearing as she questioned the man. When she had most of the story cleared, she relayed it to Bae. The captive was one of the common cavaliers of the Sprinting Wolf clan. He departed for his mission in the early morning to capture Undyne's rescue team. The reasoning behind it was simple. When Bae had appeared that night, creating chaos in the royal court, the clan members had surmised that the rogue intruder must have his own team somewhere close by as support. The clan had quickly deployed their men to scout for the hypothetical team, which led to the discovery of the rescue party, identifying them as his allies. The clan then planned to hold the party hostage. Return to your new Khan. Tell them that the west of the steppe shall forever be forbidden to you people. Break this taboo and all of you shall suffer the consequences, Bae declared as he used his acute twin blade to cut the prisoner loose. Obediently, the man scrambled to his feet and sprinted back to his clan. Submitting to his new duty as a messenger, he left with a question lingering on his mind. What new Khan? He was blissfully unaware that the Khan who had given him orders was already killed by the very man before him. Once the man was out of sight, Bae looked at Zaza. I need a little help from Cuckoo. The divine warrior nodded, bringing forth the majestic hawk eagle to him. The bird of prey's head was slightly high in a haughty angle, its brief stint as a freaked-out flying chicken long forgotten. Bae enchanted the bird with a remote surveillance magic, prompting Cuckoo to look at him suspiciously. It flapped its wings, not detecting anything different with its own body, then took off in the direction of the royal court on Zaza's command. The royal court was still a mess. Their warrior gala was cancelled, while the remaining clans were already quick on their feet to reassemble their people in preparation for another Game of Thrones. No one was quicker to seize what they saw as their birthright than the Sprinting Wolf clan. Their men had already propped every military logistics onto their carriages to head back, completely oblivious to a pair of eagle eyes. Once his target clan was located, Bae produced his Saint Force staff. A deep mumble was heard from his lips, and 3 intricate spell circles materialized around his head, waist and feet. The circles whirled around him slowly. Inscribed on them were glyphs glyphs that contemporary sorcerers had long forgotten about. Seeing a powerhouse sorcerer like him, who was used to performing spells casually without much elaborate actions, starting the spell in full sorcery formation was enough to tip off the common observer to the power the spell held. This spell, could I be mistaken? The scholar voiced out her observation hesitantly. Sir Hope, your current mana output is only on par with an advanced level sorcerer. Any attempt to accomplish ultimate magic should logically be impossible. Ultimate magic, magic of the highest order, inaccessible to any sorcerer but the most capable of magical practitioners. Apart from its deceptively harmless label of level 10 magic, there was another term the common man used to describe it: forbidden spells. Don't worry, this spell has undergone a bit of alteration, so it's no longer a legendary level spell with that amount of decreased output. I'll wager it's around a level 7 or 8 magic now, the Archmage explained. Still, its damage output probably suffers no retardation. As Bai's chanting almost ceased, the power amplification glyphs drawn on his helmet started glowing in a deep, sinister red glow. The light radiated from them and gathered themselves before his chest. The Huskar, who had been intently watching the entire incident, frowned. He might be a mole, but his honed battle instinct for danger had easily picked up the power that was surging from the soul armature, building up into some sort of climax. The others were no different. Despite being unfamiliar with the words coming out from his mouth, their sense of dread had heightened at the implicit understanding that Bai was tampering with something more violent than they could imagine. Nobody made a sound or move to avoid breaking his concentration. At the end of his chanting, the 3 spell circles were ablaze. Flames rolled toward Bai, joining the unsettling dark crimson glow before his chest. Then finally, the tempest of flames rushed outside, leaving the sorcerer who had conjured them and seemingly dissipated in thin air. Bai's chanting had come to an end. He pounded the ground forcefully with the tip of his Saint Quartz staff, and exhaled the last line of the spell. The skies set you aflame. A rattling sanguine red subtly stained the sky above the sprinting wolf clan. The clouds seemed to be set on fire. The cavalries flanking the sides of their military procurements looked up and murmured, either to themselves or to each other, about the foreboding change of climate. Then, a fine streak of light zigzagged from above, striking in lethal apathy in the middle of their congregation. The men stopped and pointed at the light. Is this the war god's blessings? Little did they know that it was no blessing. A spiraling ring of inferno suddenly descended from the sky, following the trail the white light had paved, and consumed the entire congregation. The heat emanating from its hunger ignited even the atmospheric air, as it engulfed the horses, people and supplies. It happened so fast that they did not even have time to register the pain. As if satisfied, the ring of flames erupted. A long pillar spiraled to the sky into an ominous mushroom cloud. Heat wave formed from the newly spawned magma gleefully extended themselves around the area. Lying in their wake was the earth, long past its minerals' collective boiling point, and sparks bouncing from one flaming rock to another. Even the rocks could not withstand the condition that had birthed them, as they quickly dissolved into lava, flowing like the blood of the scorched earth itself. If one were to see it from the sky above, a picture of the evergreen steppe with a sudden opening of an ablazed eye could be seen. The door of Conundrum, the Association of Sorcerers, all the organizations were immediately alerted by the sudden, violent magical vibration. Towards the northern wastelands, they launched their remote senses post-haste, a fire-based forbidden spell, Harlech's incantation of incineration. Although it was a simplified version, Bai had simulated one that was almost the same as the original ultimate magic spell with the fortification from his amplification glyphs, and all of the surviving barbarians who were spared from death prostrated themselves on the ground, their lips mumbling in prayers and exaltations in the hopes of calming the fury of a higher power. Chapter 136. When efficiency hits its limits, change the method. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Academic dissection would reveal Harlech's incantation of incineration as a lackluster spell for all the might it displayed. Its damage output was not that impressive for a fire spell, which was famed for their raw destruction, and the time it took to unleash it completely was too long. The biggest flaw, however, was that the spell had a distinct sign to mark its arrival. Anyone with a modicum of vigilance could easily evade the spell just by catching the telltale sign before it was launched. Its boon was the fact that it was a ranged spell and the range was very, very large. Practically any place the sorcerer could locate using any of their senses. As such, using means such as psychic energy or remote viewing, like how Bei had borrowed Cuckoo's vision, would dramatically increase the range of the attack. It had its strengths in an actual battle, no doubt about it. It was perfect for any static targets or edifices with little protection. It also featured spectacular, somewhat blockbuster-level visuals, perfect for a dramatic display of miracles by a pseudo-deity to the gullible barbarians. Just as fabled, a forbidden spell that had outlived its times of yore indeed eclipses normal spells in terms of power, the scholar concluded after her brief observation of the spell. The difficulty of employment is laxed, the needs of tedious supplements forsaken, and after your alteration, the requirement of mana is greatly reduced. An impressive spell to swiftly grant demise unto others. Come on, a spell that requires you to set aside some time for the chanting as a finishing move. Damn, you think everyone would show that courtesy in a real battle? Bei rolled his eyes internally, gaining a bit more insight on the fighting experience the bookworms from the Door of Conundrum possessed. Personally, Bei would only consider offensive spells that combined elements, such as Jelami Melanti, which combines ice and fire, for critical finish. Meanwhile, the other Voidwalkers were already engaged in another discussion on the feasibility of using forbidden spells. Watching them discuss the unusually proper topic, Bei turned his awareness outwards to reality. He looked back at a crowd with faces filled with suspicion and confusion. After all, the spell was launched in a distance too far away for them to see, so to them, it was as if all that build-up had amounted to nothing. Tisdale broke the silence first with her naturally curious disposition. Sir, what was that? A punishment for those evildoers? Bei replied, eyeing Atty at the corner. He added flippantly, you know, reminding them that me leaving doesn't mean they're no longer being watched. His sudden shift in attention almost gave Atty a cardiac arrest. The reason why he had chosen that spell, which he directed to the remaining few of the sprinting wolf clan instead of their actual home base, was ultimately a little flashy reminder to the barbarians to not discard their own rules just because of their lust for the throne. Of course, he was also doing it as a payback on Mia's behalf. 1. Let's talk about the details, shall we? Bei pointed at the ashes of their last night's campfire. Most of the party took their seats, except for the Divine Warriors, who were always disinterested in boring discussion that didn't exercise anything other than mouth muscles. They went to the side and started a wrestling match. Little Mia was curled up next to Bei, huddling close to him as if to make up for their brief time of separation. Meanwhile, Atty was sitting on her toes, slightly farther away from the party, taking up her role as Bei's servant. Even so, she continued to be the center of everyone's attention, especially Undyne. The butterfly Saint of Swords was hardly sitting either. Instead, she assumed a half-kneeling position that would no doubt allow her a quick jump to choke the breath out of Atty whenever possible. Her malice was obviously caused by the fact that the former king of the steppe had hung her in an uncomfortable position and painful state for at least 10 days. If it wasn't for Bei standing in their way. Calm down, Undyne, he said to her. She's no longer king of any barbarians now. She's my servant. He then launched into his long-prepared lie about the event that happened, carefully avoiding any perspective that only Sven would had in the story. That night, we were watched by around 100 people, so we didn't have any chance to save you, Bei explained to Undyne. If we made a wrong move, we could have endangered you, so we planned to save you through their agreed means. Their warrior gala, that is. But someone else had gotten to you first that night, while the steppe people themselves were suffering from their own internal discord. Undyne was perplexed, to say the least. Yet, after knowing that Bei had trampled on the barbarians so harshly, as well as disgracing them by catching their king to become his subservient servant, part of her anger subsided. She expressed it outwardly by finally sitting down, stacking one of her lean legs on the other. She was still a little dubious, and continued to voice out her suspicion. Why would that stinky, that man in black robe who had rescued me, duel with someone like you, and risk getting the war god's sword taken? Maybe he wanted a piece of my equipment. Like my staff, Bei replied suggestively, producing the Saint Quartz staff once more. Undyne's eyes lit up at the sight of the sword, but her misgivings still did not fade. Why would someone who already had their hands on something as priceless as the war god's sword still be interested in something like a Saint Quartz staff? That doesn't seem right. But Bei provided an alibi. He was with the Divine Warriors, taking up another guise. Maybe? No way. She did not pursue that line of thought, and was instead convinced that the two must have known each other or had some connection, one way or another. She held her tongue from asking, seeing that Bei had a pretty big role in her rescue. I'll just hold off the questioning till we get back, she said, forcing her distrust to rest. After all, she wasn't looking for a case closed too. She turned her attention to Atty. Master Hope, let's change the subject. That woman behind you, please allow me to take care of her. The Dole family would reward you handsomely for it. Atty visibly shrunk at the words. She did protect Undyne, in the sense that she prevented her from being deflowered, but it was through a mean that was just as cruel. If Bei really handed her over, she would basically be dead on that end. Atty stared helplessly at the back of Bei's head, willing her pleased to drill into his brain somehow. Bei did not even turn to look at her when he shook his head and replied, nope, I can't possibly do that. Undyne's mouth opened, but he shot her down with a wave. instead of rewarding me right now. I'm looking forward to the rewards your family would give me once a trading route is established here. Trading route? I can help establish that route for your family, but she would be the key to that. Do you still want her to yourself, Lady Undyne? That's not possible, she replied, her face full of disbelief. She was not the only one interested. The others were just as curious about what Bailey was about to say. Even Attie's ears seemed to have perked up as she bent slightly closer to him. At first, she had thought that Bailey's command to move her people to the west side of the steppe was a personal retribution towards her. The west was close to the ever-dangerous EOL mountains, where their nemesis, the Alpine barbarians, lived. Up north from there would be a thick, undisturbed woods where all kinds of beasts resided in. That would be completely unsuitable for humans to inhabit. However, if one was to open up a trading route, a shortcut would have to be made through the woods. So if the merchants from the south were to travel past her people's new home, it would bring prosperity as well. Her people might actually live better. Her heart warmed a little at her newfound gratitude towards Bailey, until she shook them off as hard as she could. Don't be naive, this demon is just trying to lull you into a false sense of security. He could be using this to manipulate your people. Almost had me fooled, you demon. Looks like this is going to get hard, huh? Blissfully unaware of his new servant's new conspiracy theory regarding his intention, Bailey continued telling Undyne, we'll need her clan's new home to act as one of the rendezvous points in that route. To properly illustrate his point, Bailey drew a map in midair using mana. On it, 2 marks were made distinctly apart. We're here, on the west. Move a little bit to the east would be her clan's new home. I have already used my power as a transitional king to command the barbarians to leave that area alone. So a new trading route would be here, where you will only have to interact with one lone clan. But this is not an easy route to travel at all. Undyne pointed out hesitantly. She hadn't chosen the route because a typical merchant group had many people and horses. They could not possibly enter the steppe through the Rocky Mountains, nor would they dare to travel past the Alpine warriors' territory. The only way they could travel was through the east, where the road was paved. The only problem with that was that way would cut into the steppe royals' territory, which had caused the trouble between them and Attie in the first place. That is why even your mode of transporting goods need to change. Horse carriages and people are a thing of the past, Bailey stated clearly as he wiped the map clean from the air. He drew another map again, but this time it looked more like a computer-aided draft map from Earth. On the map was an unidentified flying object that was easily recognizable to an Earthling. It looked like an airplane, or more accurately, a glider. It was designed by the engineer, based on the planes on Earth. Before he had any contact with Mia, the glider was to be powered by magic. Bailey looked at the crowd. It's high time we ditch land-based transportations and explore the possibility of aerial transportation. Chapter 137, Handsome Rewards. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Magical gliders weren't exactly a never-before-seen concept. To be frank, some smiths had already came up with the concept, but a few limitations had stopped it from being realized. For starters, there was no wind tunnel and there was no study of aerodynamics. Any man who dreamt of flight, or more exhilarating, flying at the same height as the sun, would have to rely on magic instead of engineering. The engineer only knew about airplanes after exchanging memories with Bay, and since then was devoted to designing a plane that was piloted by magic. All of his time in the void was spent on perfecting his design like a real engineer and man of science. He had only exposed his other, less modest, side ever since he came in contact with Mia. Now that his hard work was in the hands of Bay, it was finally coming to fruition. The engineer could hardly contain his emotion. "Sir Hope, you truly are my real friend." His voice was trembling. "Not only are you giving my design a chance, you even found investors for me. I'm so glad. I'm so happy. Once I get out of here, Sir Hope, I'll share half of the copyright with you." I think I'll pass on that. I'd rather be rewarded with less disgusting comments about girls from your mouth." Bay started explaining the theories and concepts of the glider to Undyne. The design that he was using was the simplified version. Because of that, it was much easier to explain the concept of the glider and to build them. Just cast a guiding formation on the glider, then set a magical point on the destination as a beacon, and the glider would be able to carry the goods and travel to the destination, hence forming a simple aerial pathway. However, there was a limit on how far the magic formations could be from each other. Even with the shortcut, the merchants would still need a stopover for the flight. That was where Axie's clan comes in. Hence, every puzzle piece had fallen into place. The Doles would set up their home base in the EOL Mountains. The clan's new home would serve as the stopover, and a few teams, acting as the receivers, would receive the goods within the Northern Kingdom. An aerial flight would allow them to avoid dangers in the EOL Mountains, the perilous steppe and the mysterious woods. A route like that would beat horses any day. Bay still had a dozen of other ideas up his sleeves. Magical transporters, airships, but the gliders were the cheapest in cost, simplest to craft and easiest in terms of manipulation. "There are other things you have to pay heed to as well," Bay added. "You can't fly it when the weather is bad. It is advisable to fly at night, where no one can see you and prevent the animals from noticing you. And most importantly, every carrier has a maximum weight capacity." Undyne was sitting gracefully at first, but somewhere during Bay's speech, she had already shifted to a more boorish position. She was so intrigued that she had completely forgotten the fact that her short skirt would expose her woman parts, and it was up to the ever so observant Tistale to cover it up for her. After mulling it over for a while, Undyne spoke slowly. "Master Hope, do you truly believe that this glider thing can be created and perform exactly as you had described?" Quite obviously, the girl was taken with the idea. If successful, then the Dole family could reduce the number of people they needed to guard their goods. That would be miles better than their current strategy of employing mercenaries while traveling through the wastelands by foot. "I will create a prototype once we return. I trust that would be more convincing than mere words." "All right, Master Hope. If this thing becomes a reality, I don't know what to do to show my gratitude," she stammered. "No, not just me. The Dole family themselves won't know what to do as well. You have saved the family. Your help is too." She studied the soul armature before him carefully as she tried to articulate her thoughts. Even if the plan failed, Undyne admitted that the man before her was already better than Sven by leaps and bounds. "Too bad I can't ask for your hand in marriage." "Huh?" Bay lamented. "To have a beauty like Undyne as my wife. Well, that would be worth the trip, wouldn't it?" Now that her family might be saved, Undyne was no longer preoccupied on the mystery of Sven and Master Hope or even her personal issue with Attie. Her family comes first before herself. After all, if an air route could be established with the help of Attie's people, then maybe sparing her previous tormentor wasn't too bad an idea. With Undyne's attitude turning relaxed, the general atmosphere had finally returned to its previous state. The others started asking about the glider, too. Even Mia grabbed his hand, as she pleaded for a trip in the aircraft. "Why do you even want to fly using an airplane?" Bay rolled his eyes internally. "You're a bloody sorcerer. Just learn flight's spell." Attie was the only one who wasn't completely relieved. She agreed with Bay's plan. Frankly, if her people are needed, then they would also be rewarded. Maybe her people could even obtain rare necessities, like salt and sugar, from the merchants. Yet, her wariness towards Bay had increased even more. The demon was smarter than she had previously estimated. That idea was something she would not be able to come up with. So can she really outwit the demon? As she started doubting her own capabilities, her gaze fell on Mia. She had noticed the tiny girl for a while now. The girl had been close to the demon the whole time, so she had made sure to observe her as much as possible. The little girl was very cute, and no doubt she would be a beauty once she grew up. In terms of physical beauty, Mia was way ahead of her. In terms of being sunny and kind, Mia was also ahead of her. No wonder that demon liked her so much. Most of all, Mia wore her heart on her sleeve and was incredible in the art of wheedling. Does that mean that this is the type of girl that demon likes? Attie started getting mildly alarmed. She scanned Mia's chest and gave a sigh of relief when she saw it was just as flat as hers. But Mia was fair, while Attie was dark-skinned one. She had lustrous black hair while Attie had awkwardly white, albino hair, and Mia had a really cute plushie that Attie strangely found herself drawn to. That's it. I'm gonna observe her even more and earn that little girl's trust. Then slowly, I'll approach that demon. Suddenly, at the side of her ear, she heard a deep voice saying, "Don't overthink. It doesn't bring any joy to your life." Attie jumped and turned to see the colorful face of the Huskar behind her. She was so engrossed in her own thoughts that she didn't even notice him approaching. Brother Hope is a good man. The ancestors had accepted him. You just be a good woman to him, and he will do the same to you, too. I'm not his woman. I'm just his servant. Attie actually was also a little clueless when it came to the concept of servants, but somehow the girl in her compelled her to make a distinction. The Huskar made a face before leaving her alone. That facial expression could be loosely translated as meh, and so the rescue party had fulfilled their mission. Most of them had their minds on the success of pioneering an aerial route as they left the steppe that was just about to be drenched in blood because of another civil war too. too. Bai thought he did pretty well this time. Excluding the mess he left on the step, he had so far obtained new raw strength from the barbarian's tribal gods, earned the divine warrior's friendship, owned the war god's sword, got himself a new servant, and most importantly, earned the unwavering trust and rewards from the Dole family. His returns were bursting to the brim just from that one trip. The divine warriors bid their farewell to the rescue party once they had reached the EOL mountains. After a few words of goodbyes, Zaza said, "I really wanna visit your place, bro, and I'll be welcoming you with the best food and wine when you do." Bai smiled as he replied. He really had grown fond of those simple folks. There was not much to describe about their return trip. It was much slower than before, because an injured man was with them, but there was no danger at all. Only Undyne had been a bit impatient at the thought of seeing the prototype glider. When the party had finally reached the gate by the southern gate, and were finally riding carriages, Ati could no longer stop herself from asking Mia, "Now that we're back, why is Master still wearing his white armor?" Throughout the journey, Mia and Ati had already had more than just simple conversations with each other. Mia, with her cheerful disposition, very easily earned Ati's trust. She even forego treating her as a servant and instead looked to her as her new sister, sharing Sharky with her. Mia answered her newfound companion casually, "Because Mr. Hope is just a soul armature. The armor is his body." Ati stared at her in shock. Chapter 138, 138, A Grieving Loss. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. 138, A Grieving Loss. Ati, of course, knew what a soul armature was. She wasn't in shock because he had hidden that fact from her or her people. She was worried about her strategy because much of it hinged on gaining his trust using my body. And now it seemed that the demon was just an incorporeal soul in an armor. That means he couldn't possibly enjoy her body. That wasn't good. How else am I going to gain his trust? Ati stared at the soul armature who was trying to grab Mia's pigtail braid. Why else would you want me around? The question hit her hard. If not not for my body, then what? Because I'm cute, even when you already have adorable little Mia, that poised beauty Tisdale, and even that bold and sexy Undine? What am I compared to all of them? Was it really for that new trading route? Attie lingered on that possibility. Then what should I do if that was the case? Comply fully or take this chance to barter for more benefits for my people? Attie. The girl was too deep in her thoughts to hear Mia, so Mia had to sit closer to Attie and pat her on the cheeks with her hammerhead shark plushie to rouse her. Sorry, Mia, I spaced out. Are you upset about something? Mia stuffed the plushie into Attie's arms. Don't worry, just cuddle Sharky, then rub your cheeks on its belly and everything will feel alright again. Of course, that was what Mia had always done to calm herself down. Attie cuddled the plushie gratefully after listening to Mia's childish yet earnest words. A bright smile lit up Attie's face as she mimicked the original owner's action and rubbed her cheeks against the belly. Strange enough, she did feel a surge of relief. Thank you, Mia. Her words came from the bottom of her heart. No matter how diabolical that demon was to Attie, Mia was an entirely different thing. She was like an angel. Why was an angel traveling with a wretched demon like him? This was just two extremes meeting each other. When my showdown with that demon comes, I'm not going to involve Mia in it. In fact, I'm going to rescue her from him, too. Attie added another mission to her own goal. She did not even realize that within a short amount of time, instead of her gaining Mia's trust, the situation had already been reversed. Attie, are you missing your mom and dad? Mia noticed her friend's eyebrows furrowing again. She reached out her fingers and massaged Attie's brows in the hopes that it could remove whatever that is plaguing her mind. No, Attie shook her head. I don't have a family of my own. I grew up alone. Whack, Mia cried out before she could control herself. A concerned expression appeared on her face instantly. Then, out of sympathy, the girl threw her arms around Attie's shoulders and gave her a tight squeeze. Don't you worry, Attie, you've got me. Big Sister Dale and Mr. Hope from now on. We're your family, she said cheerfully, loosening up the tie of a small satchel to reveal nicely baked cookies and colorful fruits. She handed the confections to Attie. They were bought by Bailey when he was looking for a carriage to take them home. Take a bite. It's so good, Mia said as she handed one cookie to Attie, her other hand quickly grabbing another one for herself. Attie accepted the offer and started nibbling it like Mia did. The cookies were bought from a generic motel somewhere close to the border, so it wasn't exactly the best. But to Attie, who had once tasted the finest food the steppe had to offer when she was still the king, the cookies somehow had an extra kick to it. Very soon, Tisdale joined them too. She recounted stories, details and knowledge about the southern lands to Attie as Attie told her stories about the steppe. The girls soon filled the carriage with an ambience of camaraderie as their jaunty laughter hung in the air. Bailey was completely oblivious to all of it. He had been participating in a lengthy conference within the void about their next move, especially about Attie. A few days earlier, while they were still traveling towards the northern gate, he had checked on the state of the mark within Attie's body while she was asleep. He found out that the mark had somehow became doormat. It no longer supplemented the same strength and battle prowess she once had. Attie was, to put it plainly, completely squishy. Her skin could easily be injured by paper. Bailey had also asked her about the mark on a separate occasion. The girl had complied and answered without putting up a fight. It seemed like she had submitted to her fate. Not that Bailey believed that act of submission completely. He just didn't care. What's a mere girl from the steppe going to do to me, as long as she was giving information? He was good. According to Attie, that mark bestowed on her a power collectively known as natural body. It allowed her to wield the war god's sword while her strength and endurance increased. In exchange for all that, her body was declared the property of the war god and was not to be subjected to a mortal's gaze, nor was she allowed to indulge in worldly pleasure. In other words, that was the reason why she dressed herself in white, semi-transparent satin with very few actual opaque cloth covering just her important bits. Seems that this war god of theirs is probably some long, lost horny mate of those few walkers in the void. Huh? Although I don't think those gentlemen would discard a cute lady just because she lost a sword. Then again, what Attie recounted was really what was told in the steppe legends. The truth might be far from it because even the barbarians themselves had little clue about the sword that they so revered. Some said it was given by the war god to protect the steppe from destruction. Some said it was the sword the war god had used while he was still human. It was then left behind after he obtained godhood. Some said it was the sword that had created Isther and was left in the steppe because that was the center of the realm. Long story short, the origin of the oh so important sword could not be traced. If the story were to be truncated to where Attie came in, it would be how she got her hands on the sword. Yet, it was just as ludicrous as the legend. When she was herding the goats, the shepherd dog carried the war god's sword in its mouth to her. Interestingly, before its rediscovery, the war god's sword had been missing for a long while. The last recorded owner was a Khan from the Rickshaw clan. The Khan had perished when the clan was suffering from internal conflict. Thus the sword was lost until